The night was heavy with smoke and sirens. On the edge of the small town, a fire burned so bright it looked like daylight had returned. A sleek black car stood in the middle of the road, flames eating through its frame, while two uniformed officers stood back with cruel smiles. To them, it was just another lesson, a way to humiliate the man they hated without reason. They thought the fire would break him. They thought his silence meant weakness, but the man did not scream. He did not beg. He stood a few steps from the burning car, his face lit by orange firelight, his fists tight, his chest rising and falling like a drumbeat of war. His eyes were sharp, not with fear, but with something the officers did not expect to control. He had lived through worse. He had trained for moments darker than this. And though he looked like a victim, he was far from one. The smoke curled upward, the car windows bursting in loud cracks. The officers laughed, nudging each other as if this was entertainment. They had mocked his skin, his strength, his pride, and now his car. To them, he was just another target. But what they did not know was that every cruel second brought them closer to a truth they could not run from. The man's muscles tensed as he stepped forward, the fire casting shadows across his back. He could smell the burning leather, the sharp sting of gasoline, the metallic taste of hate in the air. Yet, his voice was calm when he finally spoke. "You're making a mistake," he said. His words carried weight, a deep warning that neither officer understood. They only laughed louder, thinking his calm meant defeat. One officer grabbed his arm, shoving him against the hood of a patrol car. The metal was cold, rough against his skin, but he didn't resist. Instead, he let the moment stretch, let their arrogance grow. He had always known that some men needed to see their downfall before they understood it was near. The second officer leaned in close, whispering words soaked with venom. "What are you going to do now? Call someone? Cry for help?" The man's jaw clenched, but not from pain. His patience had limits, and their laughter was sharpening the edge. For years he had kept his real identity buried under simple clothes and quiet manners. But fire had a way of revealing truth. Tonight, it was not his car alone that burned. It was the thin mask he wore among men who underestimated him. He pushed away from the patrol car, his movement strong enough to make the officers stumble back. The fire roared higher behind him, and in that moment, he looked like something more than human. The night air trembled around him as if the earth itself knew who he was. The officers froze for half a second, their smirks faltering when they saw the way his shoulders squared, the way his presence seemed too large for the road they stood on. "You want to know who I am?" His voice carried through the flames, heavy, unshaken. He reached into his pocket, slow and deliberate, pulling out a black leather wallet. The officers narrowed their eyes, expecting money or papers to mock. But when the badge caught the firelight, golden and unmistakable, the laughter died. The badge gleamed, bold letters shining against the chaos. FBI. The road went quiet except for the roar of the fire. The officers stared, the color draining from their faces, their mouths suddenly dry. All the power they thought they held vanished in an instant. The man's calm smile was sharper than any blade. "Now," he said, stepping closer, "do you still want to laugh?" The flames behind him cracked, a wall of light making his figure look even more unshakable. The officers exchanged a nervous glance, realizing too late that they had not broken a man. They had started a war they could never win. The road was silent except for the crackling of fire. The badge in his hand shone like a blade of truth, cutting through the dark night. The officers who moments ago had laughed so loudly now stood frozen, their eyes wide, their faces pale. They had thought they were in control, but now they felt small, caught in a trap of their own making. The man, standing tall in front of the burning car, did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. Power was not in shouting. Power was in presence. "Step back," he said, and his words carried the weight of command. It was the kind of voice men obeyed, not because of fear, but because something inside told them resistance was useless. The officer on the left tried to hide his fear with a nervous laugh. "You think that badge makes you untouchable?" he said, though his voice cracked. "This is our town." The man took one step closer, and the fire behind him roared higher, as if the night itself was on his side. His muscles glistened under the glow, his eyes steady and sharp. "Your town?" he asked. "The law doesn't belong to men like you. It belongs to justice." The second officer's hand twitched near his holster, but he didn't draw. Something about the way the man stood, calm yet ready, made the gun feel like a useless toy. The truth was clear, their target was no ordinary man. He was trained, tested, and stronger than both of them combined. The man's name was Marcus Halle. He had served across borders, faced men who would kill without hesitation, survived missions meant to break the human spirit. He had walked through fire before, and tonight he walked through it again. The flames reflected in his dark eyes as he remembered his oath to protect, to defend, to fight for truth, even when the world turned cruel. Marcus lowered the badge, sliding it back into his pocket, but the memory of it lingered in the officers' minds. He didn't need to flash it again. The symbol of power, the truth of who he was, had already changed everything. "You thought burning my car would scare me," Marcus said. His tone was low, steady, like a storm waiting to strike. "But you don't understand. I don't fear fire. I don't fear hate. And I don't fear men who hide behind uniforms." The officer on the left swallowed hard, his confidence slipping. We were just..." His words trailed off. Excuses sounded hollow in the firelight. Marcus stepped closer, his presence pressing on them like a mountain. He didn't raise his fists. He didn't need to. Every step reminded them that their mistake was carved into the night forever. They had mocked a man who had the power to end their careers, maybe even their freedom. A loud crack came from the burning car as the hood collapsed inward. Sparks shot into the air, and for a moment, the fire lit Marcus's body like he was made of iron. The officers flinched, but Marcus didn't move. His focus was on them, sharp and unyielding. "Listen carefully," he said. "This is the last time I'll repeat myself. Drop your arrogance, or you'll answer for it in ways you can't imagine." His voice carried not just authority, but certainty, like he already knew the outcome. The officers exchanged a nervous glance. For the first time, they saw him not as a man, but as something greater. A figure who could not be broken, who carried a strength born from battles far bigger than their small world of hate. Marcus turned his back on them. A move so bold, it made their breath catch. Who turns away from armed men unless he knows they can't touch him? He walked toward the fire, closer to the car that still burned. His silhouette against the flames looked more like a legend than a man. The smell of smoke filled the air, heavy and sharp. Marcus paused, staring at the destruction of what was once his car. To anyone else, it would be a loss. But to him, it was only fuel. Fire had never been his enemy. It had always been his companion, a test he had passed time and again. Behind him, the officers stayed still, unsure of what to do. For the first time in their careers, they realized they had no power. The man they tried to humiliate had turned into the nightmare they could not escape. Marcus exhaled, slow and controlled. His war was not just with these two men. His war was with everything they represented: corruption, hate, and abuse hiding under a badge. And tonight, the fight had only just begun. The flames kept reaching higher, turning the night sky into a furious glow. Marcus stood there, calm, unshaken, as if the fire was part of him. The officers shifted nervously, their smirks now gone, their bravado burned away. They had mocked him, cornered him, and thought they had broken him. But the badge he carried had flipped the game. Marcus turned his head slightly, his sharp eyes catching theirs in the firelight. "Do you know what happens?" he asked softly. when police officers betray the very oath they swore to uphold. Neither answered. Their throats were dry, their words trapped. They had laughed minutes ago, but now the silence weighed heavy on them. Marcus stepped closer, the heat following him like a shadow. "I've seen men like you before," Marcus said. Men who thought their uniform was a shield for hate. But the truth always catches them. And tonight, truth caught you. The officer on the right clenched his jaw, trying to gather the last of his arrogance. "You can't scare us. No one will believe you." But even as he said it, doubt flickered in his eyes. Marcus almost smiled, but it wasn't joy, it was cold certainty. He pulled a small device from his pocket and raised it slightly. The red light blinked in the dark. A recording device, every word, every laugh, every insult, every sound of the fire, captured. The officers' blood drained from their faces. You were recording?" Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. He let the truth settle in like a heavy stone crushing their confidence. The flames popped behind him, throwing sparks into the air as if the night itself applauded his reveal. "You think you run this town," Marcus continued. "But I don't answer to this town. I answer to justice. And justice doesn't forget." One officer stepped back, his hands trembling. This can't." His words stumbled like a broken machine. Marcus walked past them, his boots crunching on the gravel. He stopped only inches away, his towering frame making them feel small, weaker than ever. "You should have thought before you lit that match," he whispered. The fire crackled, consuming the car behind them. But now the flames felt like they belonged to Marcus. They framed him, gave him power, made him look like a figure out of legend. Then, from down the road, headlights cut through the night. A car was approaching. The officers stiffened, panic flashing across their faces. If anyone else saw this scene, Marcus standing unbroken, their crime burning behind him, it would be over for them. Marcus didn't move. He waited. The vehicle pulled up, its engine rumbling low. It was another police cruiser. Two more officers stepped out, their faces confused at the sight of fire lighting up the night. "What happened here?" One of them called out, his eyes darting from the burning wreck to Marcus's massive frame. The two guilty officers glanced at each other, desperate, sweat dripping down their brows. They had no story that could hide the truth. Not with Marcus there. Not with the recorder in his pocket. Marcus folded his arms, his body still shining with the reflection of fire. "Ask your partners," he said calmly. "They'll tell you." The newcomers looked uneasy. The flames reflected in their eyes as they turned toward their fellow officers, waiting for an explanation. But no words came. The guilty officers' mouths opened and closed like fish caught out of water. Their power had turned to dust. Marcus let the silence stretch, heavy and suffocating. Then he spoke again, his voice like iron. "The car burned. Their hate burned with it. But I'm still here. And I don't fall." The two new officers looked at him with caution, their instincts telling them he wasn't an ordinary man. There was something about the way he carried himself, something that felt unshakable, larger than life. Marcus turned back toward the fire, the blaze now lower, but still fierce. He didn't need to fight them. The truth was already winning. And the night had only just begun. The new officers stood near their cruiser, their faces tense as they took in the scene. The wreck of Marcus's car burned behind him, its metal groaning as flames chewed through what remained. Sparks flew into the night sky like pieces of shattered truth. Marcus stood between the fire and the men who had tried to humiliate him, his broad frame casting a shadow across the road. The guilty officers shifted, sweat dripping down their temples despite the cool night. Their arrogance had melted away. Now only fear sat in their eyes. They were caught, and they knew it. But men like them never gave up easily. Lies were their last weapon. One of them stepped forward, his voice shaky but loud. "This man attacked us. He resisted arrest. The car caught fire during the struggle. Marcus did not flinch. He simply raised the small recording device again, the red light still blinking. "Say that again," he said. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. The newcomers froze. They weren't fools. They had heard whispers of Marcus Halley before, though they never thought they would meet him here. An FBI agent with a reputation for breaking cases wide open, for never bending under pressure. To see him standing there now, unburned by hate or fire, made the stories feel real. Marcus's eyes stayed locked on the liars. "You burned my car because you thought I was weak. You laughed while flames rose around me. And you did it all under the badge you swore to protect. That is not law. That is not justice. That is cowardice." The fire hissed as metal collapsed inward, and the sound cut through the silence like thunder. The guilty officers trembled. Their lie had no legs left to stand on. The newcomers exchanged uneasy glances. One of them cleared his throat. "Sir, if you really are FBI, we should contact the sheriff." Marcus turned his head slightly, the firelight flickering across his strong features. "Do it," he said. His calmness was more terrifying than anger. The officer hurried to the cruiser, grabbing the radio. Static filled the air, followed by a sharp voice on the other end. The message was short but powerful. The sheriff was on his way. The guilty officers stiffened in panic. Their last shield was crumbling. The sheriff would not be able to protect them if Marcus revealed the recording. Every insult, every cruel laugh, it was all sealed evidence. Their careers were already ash. Marcus let them squirm. He did not move, did not blink, only watched. He had learned long ago that silence was the sharpest blade. It made men reveal themselves. Finally, one of them broke. "Look, we didn't mean. It wasn't supposed to go this far." His partner cut him off with a hiss, but it was too late. The weakness was exposed. Marcus stepped forward, and both officers flinched like children. "You think tonight is just about me?" His voice was low, heavy, carrying the weight of years in the field. "How many others have you broken? How many voices silenced? How many flames burned before mine?" The words struck harder than any fist. For the first time, the officers felt the shadow of their own deeds closing in. Marcus was not just one man. He was the mirror they had avoided for years. From down the road, another sound rose, the growl of engines. Multiple vehicles this time. More cruisers, their red and blue lights flashing against the night. The sheriff was not coming alone. The guilty officers' faces drained white. Marcus folded his arms, his chest broad, his gaze unshaken. "The fire took my car," he said softly, almost like a promise. "But it lit something much bigger. Tonight, the flames are yours to carry." The new cruisers pulled in, their lights washing the road in color. Doors slammed, boots hit gravel, and the night filled with movement. Marcus stood still, a man carved from stone, waiting for justice to arrive. The night grew louder as the flashing red and blue lights filled the road. One cruiser after another stopped in a line, their engines humming, their radios crackling with chatter. Doors opened, and boots struck the ground. The sheriff himself stepped out of the last vehicle, his broad hat casting a long shadow over his face. The guilty officers stiffened, their bodies tense. Fear crawled up their spines as they realized escape was impossible now. The newcomers shifted nervously, unsure whether to side with their partners or the calm, unshakable man who stood before the flames. The sheriff's eyes went first to the burning car, its metal twisted and glowing red. Then his gaze shifted to Marcus. He studied him for a long moment, and though his face was firm, something in his eyes flickered recognition. "Agent Halley," the sheriff said slowly. The guilty officers froze at the name. He already knew. "Didn't expect to see you here." Marcus gave a slight nod, his arms still folded, the firelight reflecting off his skin. "Neither did they," he said. tilting his head toward the officers who had torched his car. The sheriff's jaw tightened. He turned to them, his voice cold. "Explain, now." One officer stammered, words tumbling out in broken pieces. We were just stopping him." "Routine check." He resisted. "Liar." Marcus's voice cut through the excuse like steel. He pulled the recorder from his pocket and held it up, the small red light blinking like a heartbeat. "Every word. Every action. Every laugh you had while my car burned, it's all here." The group of deputies behind the sheriff muttered quietly, shock clear on their faces. The sheriff raised his hand for silence. His face was stone, but his eyes burned. "Is this true?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. The guilty officers swallowed hard, their bodies shaking. For the first time, they had no mask left to wear. They were cornered, stripped of their false power. Marcus stepped closer, his presence filling the space. "You thought fire would erase me. Instead, it erased you." His words hung in the air, heavy with finality. The sheriff turned to his men. "Arrest them." The road erupted in motion. The guilty officers tried to resist, their voices rising in protest. But their own brothers in uniform grabbed them, forcing their hands behind their backs. Their shouts carried no power anymore. They sounded like echoes of men who had already fallen. As they were pushed toward the cruisers, Marcus spoke once more. "This wasn't just about me. Every soul you hurt before tonight, every person you mocked or crushed, they'll have their justice too." The sheriff studied Marcus carefully, his hat shadowing his expression. "I've heard of you," he admitted. "The Bureau sends you where things need to be burned down and built again." Marcus glanced back at the flames still devouring his car. "Then tonight was fitting." The sheriff gave a slow nod. "You know this won't stop here. Their families, their friends, they'll fight back. This town protects its own, even the rotten ones." Marcus's jaw tightened, his gaze still locked on the burning wreck. "Let them try. Fire doesn't scare me. Hate doesn't scare me. I've stood against worse, and I'll keep standing." The sheriff didn't answer, but the look in his eyes showed respect, the kind one soldier gives another when he realizes he's in the presence of something unbreakable. The arrested officers were shoved into the back of cruisers, their shouts muffled by the slamming of doors. The fire hissed behind them, smoke twisting into the stars like a warning to all who watched. Marcus turned slowly, his figure framed by the blaze. His car was gone, but what it represented remained: strength, endurance, a man who could not be destroyed. The sheriff spoke one last time. "What now?" Marcus's eyes narrowed. "Now we see how deep the rot goes. And then we cut it out." The fire behind him crackled, as if agreeing with every word. The road was quiet again, but the silence no longer belonged to the officers who once mocked Marcus. It belonged to him. The cruisers hummed in the background, their red and blue lights flashing against the smoke, while the sheriff stood still watching. The fire had nearly eaten through the last of Marcus's car, its frame collapsing into glowing ash. Marcus's face was calm, his chest steady, but inside he carried the weight of years. He had seen this pattern before in cities, in towns, in places far from the eyes of the world. Hate dressed itself in uniforms, spoke with authority, and pretended it was justice. But tonight proved what Marcus always knew. Hate burned itself in the end. The guilty officers sat handcuffed in the back of cruisers, their voices hoarse from useless protests. Every word they had spoken was recorded, sealed. No cover-up could save them now. The sheriff finally stepped closer, his boots crunching on the gravel. "Agent Halle," he said in a low voice, "you could have walked away. Let it slide. But you chose fire." Marcus's gaze lifted from the ashes to the sheriff. His voice was calm, even, but it carried the kind of strength that made men listen. "I didn't choose fire. They did. I chose truth. The sheriff studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. There was no more to say. Marcus turned toward the other officers, the ones who had arrived later and seen the truth unfold. Their faces were a mix of fear and respect, but he addressed them without raising his voice. Remember this night. Remember that your badge is not a shield for hate. It is a way to promise. If you use it to harm the innocent, you betray not only the law, but yourselves. The words hit them harder than any order could. Some shifted uncomfortably, but others held his gaze, understanding the gravity of his warning. The fire behind him finally began to die, the flames lowering to glowing coals. Marcus took one last step toward the wreckage. He placed his hand on the scorched hood, the metal still hot. His car was gone, but it was only steel and glass. What truly mattered was still alive, burning stronger inside him. The sheriff broke the silence. What will you do now? Marcus exhaled, his eyes steady. I'll keep doing what I've always done. I'll stand where others fall. I'll fight where others hide. And I'll make sure hate never wins. With that, he turned away from the flames, his silhouette sharp against the flashing lights. The officers moved aside as he passed, their respect clear in their silence. Even in a town that had mocked him, even surrounded by men who once laughed at his suffering, Marcus walked away unbroken. The sheriff watched him go, the night air heavy with smoke and truth. He knew what he had just seen was more than a man, it was a reminder. A reminder that true power came not from fear, but from standing tall when the world tried to push you down. As Marcus disappeared into the night, the fire behind him gave its final crack, sparks rising into the dark sky like embers of a legend. The town would remember this night, whispered in bars, retold in hushed tones. They would remember the man who stood against fire and hate and did not fall, because Marcus Holley was not just a victim. He was not just an agent. He was proof that justice, once awakened, never bowed.